The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good morning, everyone. We would like to thank you for joining us today for the Chemwatch Risk Assessment webinar. My name is Paul Benbow, Business Development Manager for Chemwatch, and I'll be your host for today's event. A little housekeeping before we get started. On your GoToMeeting control panel, you have a little orange box. You can push that and that will minimize the screen. And at the bottom, there's an area for chat questions. If you would just enter any questions that come up during today's event, we will have a short Q&A session at the end and we'll address your questions as best we can. So getting that out of the way. We will be sending out a recording from this event and our slide deck. So if you can't take notes or you're trying to screen capture, we'll send everything out so you'll be able just to focus on the webinar without taking notes. A quick introduction of the team. Tom Hassey, Business Development Manager, will be doing a lot of the presentation. Myself in the middle, and Augusta Brindley is our Technical Product Manager and Technical Product Specialist. She'll be doing most of the heavy lifting, doing the demo. Most of the demonstration today, or most of the presentation is the demonstration today, so I'm sure you'll enjoy that. And Gussie does a great job. Today's topics, it's a risk assessment webinar. Our tagline is, it's not the hazard, it's the risk, and good tagline. But basically today we're going to be talking about the differences between risk assessment, hazard assessment, and risk analysis. The methods and tools for completing risk assessments, dangerous goods risk assessments, regulatory status of risk assessments, control banding and in-depth analysis, classification criteria, the importance of risk assessment in a chemical approvals workflow, and the risk assessment report. So I know this is a great subject and a lot of interest in this topic. Just before we get started, I want to give you a little background on Chemwatch. We basically are an international company. We have the best risk assessment package on the market. I know that's a bold statement, but in the next 55 minutes, we hope to show you why our risk assessment solution is the best on the market. We are an international company. We've been doing this for a long time. It all starts with data. We have the world's largest database. We have 20 million vendor SDSs that we basically data extract about 7 to 10 data points. But one new feature we have that's exciting is our vendor gold SDSs. We have about 2 million vendor gold SDSs where we've extracted over 50 data points. We can take this vendor gold data and push it into all of our systems we have, most of our systems, and generating all the reports, risk assessments, labels. So the majority of everything that used to be reserved for our gold data, our gold SDSs, which we have 350,000, we can now do with vendor gold data. So you have your choice now. You can use our gold SDSs, which are a reauthored collection of SDSs that we have about 450 data points on, or you can use vendor gold SDSs. So this way it gives you the option of using both. And we're frequently asked, what data points do you extract from a vendor SDS to create your vendor gold SDSs? So here's an example of about 50. There's a few more depending on the manufacturer that we capture, but we basically capture roughly these 50, but potentially more. Well, one exciting feature we have is basically our UGD data. So UGD is user gold data. So if we don't have an SDS in our 2 million that you have, you basically now have the opportunity to take your SDSs and enter the data that we would enter, and then you can run your risk assessment from that. So it used to be in the past, if we didn't have the gold SDS, we would have to get that gold SDS in the system. But that changed as of about 3 months ago. So with great excitement, we can show you the new feature of how we can take user data and basically create the SDS, like our vendor gold data, and then we can run that through our engine and most of our systems, so you get the benefit of that. So if we don't have it, you can enter it yourself and get on with your creating your risk assessment or labels or whatever you need to do. Now I'm going to hand the presentation over to Mr. Tom Hassey. So Tom, let me give the presentation to you.
Thank you, Paul, and welcome everyone. Thank you again for attending. I'm going to spend a few minutes on some slides that will basically talk about what you will be seeing during the demo. And then Gusty will take you through how the software actually works. But before we get started, let's sort of set the table in terms of what is risk and what is not risk. Well, hazard is not risk. These are completely different. A hazard is a source of potential damage or harm or adverse effects on something or someone. A risk is the chance or probability that a person would be harmed or experience adverse health effects. And so what exactly is risk assessment? And it's used sometimes in relation with risk analysis. So let's separate the two right now. Risk assessment is, quite frankly, the scientific component of risk analysis. As you can see with the three circles down below, a risk assessment is all about the science of the chemical, the hazard IDs, its characterization, the exposure assessment, and the categorization of risk. Risk analysis is a decision-making process based upon science. So again, it uses the science of risk assessment to allow good decision-making to occur. To separate it again, this science-based process consists of those following attributes, whereas the risk analysis is, again, a decision-making process, but it is three activities. Obviously, the scientific part, the risk assessment. In addition to that is the risk management. In other words, the approach or policy of weighing alternatives, and risk communication, the interactive exchange of the information throughout the risk analysis. And what we at Chemwatch use, and it's been used throughout the world, we'll talk about that here in a minute, for over 30 years, is we use the control banding approach to risk assessment. And this minimizes the subjective decision-making by following a scientific method for assessing risks associated with the use of chemicals. And it tends to be what we call an action-oriented qualitative risk assessment. That is, it's all about assessing the tasks or jobs that are being performed when handling this chemical. It also provides a simplified process for controlling exposure. So its origins quickly actually started in the 70s, but became full. It was first adopted by the pharma industry, by its OHS experts in the late 80s. But starting in the 90s, it quickly expanded to become the most used chemical risk assessment methodology worldwide. Currently, over 2.5 billion workers, their workstations have been assessed, so to speak, by this technique. And it continues to grow. China is endorsing control banding as the preferred method for assessing chemical risks. In fact, we're actually an official partner of the Chinese government. Also, the EU agencies are actively promoting the use of control banding. So what has happened is basically there's over 20 years of expertise that contributed to the evolution of control banding. This includes the occupational hygienists via the IOHA and also specialists from around the world. But also in Europe, this has been further refined under the COSH essentials, which is used to facilitate business compliance with the regulations. But more importantly, it eliminates expertise as a factor. This is an objective way of looking at these. So in terms of risk assessment overview, it's really 4 stages, and Gussie will go through this in a minute. Stage 1 is the severity, the identification of the hazard. The probability, that is the probability of exposure, which is dependent, of course, on its potential to become airborne, the size or scale of use, and its frequency. And then it's the actual calculation of the risk effect, and then controls that need to be put in place in the workplace to assure that that calculated risk effect is indeed carried out. And I'll talk briefly about each stage. So the hazard IDs comes out of the SDS classification. And what happens is it tends to be grouped into 5 hazard groups, these different H codes. And it's done based on the severity of hazard. So from that exercise, you can create down below the multicolored matrix. That is a risk matrix. So you can create a risk matrix from basically what I call normalizing the H codes, basically creating 5 categories from the literally over 100 different H codes that are available. And what control banding does is it takes that risk matrix and basically makes it simple to use in the sense of it comes up with a control banding scheme based on 5 categories, just like the risk matrix, that allows you to apply specific controls against that control band to enable the calculated risk effect. And it'll become much clearer here in a minute when we get into the actually showing it. Probability, scale of use. This is determined by the amount of chemical in being used, but also its exposure in the sense of if you look at weight or the quantity. We also look at how it's packaged, because that obviously affects the likelihood of exposure. Also, we look at the probability of this substance becoming airborne. For solids, that's dustiness, and for liquids, it's volatility. Right now, please just bear with us. We'll be right with you here in about 60 seconds.
It just came back, Tom. It's like the ghost in the machine, so you're back live.
Okay. Thanks, folks, for sticking around for that delay. Hopefully gave you a chance to go get another cup of coffee. Okay, Paul, could you go back to stage 3, please? So what we were talking about earlier, severity of the hazard and the probability of exposure. And what our tool allows you to do is basically create, it's almost like a design of experiment where you can vary operating temperature, the volatility, scale of use, frequency of use to calculate based upon a specific hazard rating, again is defined by its H codes, to come up with a risk band or what we call a risk effect. And that risk band will then apply down below, you see, to the applied control. So that 2 basically means, in terms of the risk matrix, it means it's low. And in control banding, what we're saying is low just requires general ventilation only. Stage 4, the ILO control approach for worker exposure. Chemwatch provides access to the ILO control documents, as well as allowing users to add their own control documents to the risk assessment. So for instance, there may be documentation around skin or inhalation, but we also allow you to add your own support documentation that you may have developed internally to that risk assessment. And to take it further, so what we were talking about earlier in terms of defining the risk effect is for worker safety. You can also define the risk effect for storage and transport of of this chemical. So for worker safety, we use the International Labor Organization, or ILO, rules. For our control approach for storage and transport, we use the UN rules. And what this allows you to do, again, we're using control banding. The control banding for the worker safety can then basically can be used in the same way for your facilities or engineering controls. So what the software will do, let's say based upon a control banding of 3 or 4, it will define specifically your building installation requirements, thickness of walls, segregation of the material. If it needs to be stored in a tank, it defines the thickness of the wall, the size of the tank, the thickness of the pipe, or sorry, the diameter of the piping. So it gets very specific, let's say, on the facilities engineering side of safe use of chemicals in terms of storage and transport. So now I'd like to turn it over to Gusty, and she'll show you how the product works.
Hi everyone. As Tom mentioned, my name is Augusta Brindley and I'm a technical specialist here at Chemwatch. I will be showing you a demonstration of our risk assessment module today. Now this is a module within another package. So typically you would have the home module, which is primarily used for SDS management, on top of having the risk assessment module. Now within the home module, you will have a folder structure where you will store your SDSs, and then again you have the option to have a vendor SDS that has that vendor extracted data, or you can opt to extract the data off of that vendor document yourself. And we also have gold documents that are independently researched and written by our team here at Chemwatch. Now everything that's stored within your user-defined folder structure is mirrored over into our risk assessment module. So you'll see that whenever you enter the risk assessment module, you will have your folders appear here. And again, this is user-defined. You would base this off of your organizational needs. Some of our customers opt to base this off of location, but you could certainly do this on multiple factors. So you can store those SDSs in very specific areas, and you are in charge of defining this folder structure. Now, once an SDS is pulled into a folder within the home module, again, that will be mirrored within our risk assessment module. You'll see here that I have some materials already saved within my folders. So some of these materials have risk assessments that have already been performed, while others do not have risk assessments performed yet. So you'll see here within the status column, it will give you an indicator as to whether the material has had a risk assessment performed or not. So you'll see here this indicates that a risk assessment is required, that a risk assessment has been completed. Sometimes you might want to flag them for review. In some cases, a risk assessment might not be completed in one module or another, as Tom mentioned during the PowerPoint portion of the presentation. And then you can also flag these as not being required at all. Now, in order to perform a risk assessment on a chemical, you would locate an area in which you would like to perform the risk assessments in that area. And you'll see here that I have chosen a parent folder, so it's going to show me all of the items within that particular parent folder. Now you'll see that I can change the view here using these pages, or I can adjust how many risk assessments I view here. Additionally, I would like to point out that we again have two separate types of risk assessment. We have one that is mainly concerned with the health hazard risks, and then we also have another one that is for transport and storage. In this case, I'm going to focus on the ILO module, and then we'll move over to the UN tab. So here you'll see that I have chemicals, and in order to perform a risk assessment, I would just need to locate a chemical in which a risk assessment has not already been performed. I would need to unlock that, and then I would assign it a task. So these would be specific to how this is used within your organization, and you'll see that we already have some tasks defined here in our system, or you can add user-defined tasks here as well. In this case, I'm going to say that this is going to be used for mixing, and then I can view the vendor document itself. I can see the type of data that's associated with that. So you'll notice that I have a existing hazard rating that is based off the H codes of this substance. Now this has been applied from either our gold SDS's VGD data that has been extracted by us here at Chemwatch from that vendor document, or has been extracted by somebody in your organization through UGD. Now, since you have this baseline information, it's able to give you a hazard rating for that substance. So you'll be able to see the original hazard rating. And you'll also want to define the operating temperature. So how this is used, you'll see that I can adjust this using this little toggle here, or I can just type in the operating temperature as I'm doing here. Additionally, you have the option to define the volatility or dustiness of this. So this, again, is just the probability of this to become airborne. For solids, that's the ability to break up into a fine dust-like particle, and that's based on its physical form. And for liquids, this is related to the substance's volatility, so that's related to the boiling point and then also the operating temperature. In this case, it's locked because it has a standard volatility or dustiness, but you can unlock it and adjust it if you would like. Additionally, you would like to define the scale of use, so how this is used within your organization. So you'll see here that I can adjust how this is used, and as I adjust that, it will actually reflect in the risk band of that substance. Additionally, I can also modify the frequency of use. So you'll see here that if I adjust the frequency of use, you'll see that the risk band over here, which was originally a 4+, has now been reduced, because based on, again, the volatility, dustiness, scale of use, and also the frequency of use, that is actually being modified, and those calculations are being performed by the system in real time. So you'll see here now, based on how we're using the substance, my risk band has been reduced. I can also apply controls here, so you'll see that our system is going to default to controls that should be used with this particular chemical. So these are the applied controls. Those that are in green are those that are suggested by the system. So these are the controls that are recommended. So you'll see that as I apply the recommended controls, again, there's a risk calculation that is being performed by our system in the background based on your risk matrix to calculate this band over here. And again, it has been reduced now that we have applied the appropriate controls. And again, these would be the controls that you're using in the local area that you have. Additionally, you have the option to review the PPE associated with this particular chemical. Now, you'll see those that have this green icon are those that are recommended by Chemwatch. So those that should be used when handling or managing this chemical, but you could certainly add others, and those would be included in your final risk assessment report. Additionally, you can also indicate whether training is required. So this will actually dictate some of the language that's produced in your final report as well. So we'll go ahead and add those. Finally, you can also add phrasing. So there's phrasing that you can add to your final report, and there's default phrasing that has been provided by our system, or you can also add custom phrasing based on maybe a custom task that you define with that particular risk material. So you'll see here that I can apply some of these to my final report, and then I can also define the discharge, and you'll see that I can also see tags that are associated with that. So you might want to use these tags to prioritize certain materials that you would like to perform risk assessments on first. So those that are either have a higher hazard rating or those that are on particular regulatory lists. You can flag or tag those. Now, once you have defined the environment and how that's used, and you've applied the appropriate controls and the appropriate phrasing, you would just simply need to lock your risk assessment. So this is a way of saving that risk assessment to this particular module. So in this case, it's going to save it to the ILO tab. So we're going to say that this has been completed, and it's asking me if I would like to copy this data over to the other module. So in this case, it would be copying it over to the UN module, which is the transport and storage module. So I will say yes. And you'll see that that risk assessment has now been complete. So all of the information that I have saved with this particular material has now been applied. And you'll see here that it again will show that original hazard rating, and now it's showing a reduced risk based on how you're using that particular material in your environment. And we can also view this report as well. So if we wanted to view the report that we just produced with this material, you'll see that it is going to produce a one-page summary of the information that we have applied to that particular material. So again, this is the health risk assessment report. It's going to display the original hazard and then now the risk, now that you have applied controls, and then also it's going to identify information like respiratory protection factor. It's going to outline the ingredients in this particular pure substance, or if it's a mixture, it will outline all of the ingredients. It's going to outline the Chemwatch hazard rating. So we rank these based on flammability, toxicity, body contact reactivity, and other chronic effects. Additionally, you'll be able to see the hazard statements, you'll be able to see control information, and then again, based on the selections that you made during the risk assessment, it will essentially put certain phrasing within here. So if training is required, it's going to indicate that training is required for that material, and it's going to put in the select phrases in which you have selected within the risk assessment. Now, again, this information is copied over to the UN module. So again, this is our transport module. So you'll see here that if I go into the transport module, I can find that same material. And here I've selected my parent folder, but if you had a particular area, you might have maybe 5 in there, 10 in there. It really depends on how granular you get with those folders. But you can locate the material in which you have performed a risk assessment for. It's easy to find those in which you have already performed a risk assessment in the ILO module, because they will indicate that data has been saved with that particular material, but the risk assessment is still incomplete for this particular module. So you'll see this is indicated by this yellow icon with the question mark. So again, that information has been transferred over. You'll see that the task information is displayed right here under the material name. Again, you're going to see the hazard rating as it relates to transport and storage. The operating temperature, volatility, dustiness, and scale of use and frequency of use will also transfer over, but you could also adjust this based on how it's used and, you know, maybe that particular environment. This kind of just gives you a jumping off point. Now, once this is unlocked, you would go to the control section, assuming that you would keep everything the same, and you'll see here that you are able to essentially add additional information as it pertains to dangerous goods. So here you can say whether this is flammable, whether chemical explosion is a concern, whether this is explosive to the atmosphere, whether you have performed a compliance checklist. So you would check all of those that apply. You can say when this appliance check was performed and when it was reviewed. And additionally, you can also define controls, so auxiliary controls, engineering controls, and administrative controls. So you can say which of these have been performed with regard to personal protective equipment, waste and disposal, and also first aid. So you'll see here I can actually apply all of those using this master toggle up at the top, or I can select individual phrases that I would like to be included in my report. Additionally, you can say that the PPE has been reviewed. Again, it's going to transfer over that information that we applied within the ILO module. And you can also review the standards that are associated with this particular material. As Tom mentioned, we actually provide documents here for you to review. Additionally, you can also add documents that you think are relevant that might not be added by default within our system. So essentially, you would just click this browse button and you would link it to a document or a database or something that's stored locally on your computer. Now, once this risk assessment for transport has been completed, you would save this, and it's going to ask if that you would like to save that. Again, it's going to indicate that now this risk assessment has been performed and it has been saved. And you can also view a report as it pertains to transport and storage. So again, it's going to look very similar to that health risk assessment report, but again, this is going to be specific to dangerous goods, and again, it's going to outline the information that's specific to that chemical and that risk assessment that you performed. Now, all of the documents here, not only in risk assessment and throughout our home module, can be printed, sent to, or saved. So you can print that locally to your device. You can send it to somebody internal or external to your organization, or you can save that. Now, going back to our risk assessment, I do want to point out that you can not only save this based on a task, you can also group these into jobs as well. So going back here to the ILO module, we will open up this chemical again that we performed that risk assessment on, and we will unlock it. And we will go to our report, and you'll see here that within the reporting feature, you have the option to assign this to a particular job. And these jobs would be defined again by your organization. These would be jobs that would be associated with particular processes within your organization. So if I would like to save this to a job, you'll see that I can apply a code. I would also need to indicate a job name. So again, you could save that or associate that with a process. Now you'll notice that as I type in that process name, that it's going to bring down a drop-down list. So these are going to be jobs that have already been saved and applied in your system. So you can save this particular task or this particular risk assessment task to a particular job that already exists within your organization, or you can create a new job. So in this case, I will just go ahead and create a new job, and I will say that this has been assessed by me, and I will go ahead and say that this will be approved by my manager. And I will indicate the number of people who will be exposed in this particular process. And I can go in here and I can type in an operating procedure. And again, this would be specific to your organization and your process. You can add the date in which it was added, so you'll see that it will default to today's date, or you can go in here and select a month and a particular day, and you can apply that to your risk assessment. So you'll see here that we can go forward in time as well, and we can submit that. And again, this information will not only be compiled within your report, so that job information will be outlined at the bottom of this report. So it's going to include information like the code, the job name that I just defined, the dates that I put in. Again, it's going to have the persons exposed, assessed by, and you can even incorporate e-signatures into these reports as well. Additionally, that job that you created or the risk assessment that you have assigned to a job will be here within our jobs panel. So I switched over to the jobs panel. There was a button that said jobs, and you'll see that all of the processes that I have created or the jobs within my particular organization will be outlined here, and you can view all of those risk assessments based on the job type. So these are previous processes that I have created. So if I go to process A, you'll see that there are 2 materials that are used in that process, and you can see the individual tasks that are associated with that process. And I can go down this list and I can view all of those jobs independently to see the information that is associated with it. So in this particular process, I have 4 different chemicals that are used, and risk assessments have already been performed on these chemicals and tasks have been assigned. You can also produce a job report for this particular job. So you'll see here, if I would like to produce that report, I simply go to the jobs report, and it's going to summarize the information based on the materials used in that particular process or that particular job. So you'll see here that it's going to outline all of the job information, the hazard, the risk, the status. It's going to have the reassess date. It's going to indicate the type of PPE that's required for the entire job, and it's going to outline the PPE that's required for each of those individual materials. So you'll see here it's going to outline the chemical name, the task that's associated with it, the hazard rating, the risk based on the risk assessment that you performed, the controls, and then also the PPE here. Again, you can print, send to, or save this, and as with most of the documents in our database, you can actually translate these into multiple languages. Our system supports 47 different languages, language formats. So that is the bulk of our risk assessment module. Now there are other features to it as well, but that is the main features that we're going to cover in today's webinar. Now, to conclude that, I'm going to go ahead and pass this off to Paul so that he can, or actually Tom, so he can run through the remainder of our slides, and then we can have a Q&A session at the end.
Thank you, Gusty. Okay, folks, a few more slides. I'll make it quick, but thank you again, Gusty. It was well done. And I just have a few slides that just sort of build upon what Gusty was talking about. So when we are addressing frequency, excuse me, the frequency of use, I want to note that, let you know that is the ILO model is based upon a 40-hour work week. So what we have done is we have enhanced the model by adopting a model from the Lawrence Livermore Labs where they use for control banding for nanomaterials. So what this allows is you can do analysis on shorter duration and frequency of use as opposed to just the 40-hour work week. Task specific, as you saw, Gusty was going through a number of tasks that you can assign the risk assessment to, but we want to make it clear that assignment of task is, quite frankly, mostly a largely administrative purpose. That is, the probability of exposure, excuse me, tends to be fairly consistent across most tasks except for 2, and that is these 2 tasks where, quite frankly, high vapor or dust, these are dust generating processes, which will require higher level controls. And these 2 tasks are spraying and welding. So we recognize this, and we suggest pre-selection of appropriate control measures when you're doing an analysis or risk assessment on those 2 tasks. And as Gusty was mentioning, the job is a series of tasks. So our software allows you to look at each specific task and, quite frankly, create, using a sequence of tasks, a specific job. And that is a risk assessment on a job based upon its subset of tasks. And what you need to do is the task with the worst possible outcome defines the risk assessment for the job. But what's important about this task breakdown real quickly is you can move people in and out of certain assignments where, let's say you have a risk of effect, let's say it forces containment, where you might be able to rotate people in and out of specific tasks to lower the probability of exposure. So then, quite frankly, you can fit the task to the person's skill set, lack of a better term. Control banding dangerous goods. What Gusty was showing you is basically what we would call health risk assessment on the worker, where you can use the same principles, that is the control banding approach, to do a physical risk assessment regarding dangerous goods. So in other words, you can use the physical hazard ratings that's calculated based on DG classification. You can use that in place of the hazards rating that's being used in the health risk assessment. The next slide will show this a little more specific. So in the stage 1 severity, the hazard grouping, well, you just substitute it. You substitute the DG classification for that, and then you can do a risk assessment on the physical portion. And you go a little deeper in terms of dangerous goods. What you can then do on top of the risk assessment is actually assign specific properties, as inflammability, chemical instability, others. And then also use our checklist to apply specific controls in terms of the use of that dangerous good. And you can see some down below, how to handle waste, the installation itself, how to separate things. Oh, by the way, that will change according to the waste disposal parameters, will change according to the DG rating. Also, oh, sorry, Paul, you can continue on. So we talked about health risk assessments with hazard groupings. We talked about physical risk assessments with DG classification. You can also do environmental risk assessments. This is actually because GHS classification takes into account environmental hazards. So those can be used as the basis of the severity calculation. So to use this tool, basically what you would do is eliminate the scale and frequency parameters around the probability component of the risk assessment process. And the next slide will show that specifically. So in stage 2 probability, what you would do is just eliminate scale of use and frequency of use, and now you can do risk assessments on the environment. And as Gusty was showing you, the linchpin, the anchor of this entire risk assessment process, quite frankly, is the report. This is a communication tool across the enterprise, but we've created these, we designed them specifically for workers in that work cell. What do we mean by that? The report is designed so it's easy to understand. We use a lot of color coding, as you can see, icons and images wherever possible. And we spend a lot of time creating concise phrasing, that is, using simplified and short phrases. And the document itself is really an outline of everything that has potential impact in terms of the risk assessment. So the goal is to not have experts on hand to understand the content of the report. This is made for the folks on the floor. And we've constantly refining this report structure. We've been doing this over 20 years based on worker feedback. And what this does is it specifically documents the required standard operating procedure, PPE, and controls needed for that work cell to meet the risk effect that you just calculated. So how can Chemwatch help? Well, Paul's going to take you through that right now.
Hey, great job, Tom. One thing I thought of briefly, I'm going to go back to this slide. And if you notice down here, you see our mobile app and tablet. We don't have a slide on this, but our entire product family, with the exception of authoring and SDS, can be run in a mobile device. We support Android as well as iOS. We also support single sign-on, so if you have single sign-on implemented in your organization, your mobile devices, we can support that. So we, of course, support single sign-on on our main application. But I did want to just take a second to point out that we do have a mobile suite. You can create a risk assessment on our mobile device from our mobile suite, and you can also, of course, view the reporting, or you could forward a risk assessment to somebody else, as well as you could forward an SDS, or do just about most things, except for you cannot author an SDS with our mobile app. So just had that kind of thought there real quick. But basically, we see chemical management as data, expertise, and a platform. So, data, we have very strong data. We have over 20 million vendor SDSs. We have a regulatory database that we didn't mention, but we actually have our own integrated regulatory database, has 6,100 regulatory databases inside that regulatory database. We have a team of experts, about 170 global, that can help you. Chemwatch as a company is an SDS authoring company, and we also do chemical management. So we have a team of people that really understand chemicals. So we don't see this as a IT, managing PDFs that are SDSs in our system, although we do that very well. But we have the experts behind this information that understand why. And then our platform, we use Amazon Web Services, fully hosted, secure, bulletproof, and everything that you have seen us present runs in the cloud. So any machine that you have just about, in your company, be it Safari, Google Chrome, Internet Explorer, iOS, Android, whatever, pretty much everything can access this information in the cloud, and it's fully scalable. We can roll it out for a small company. We can roll it out for, very large, multinational company. So scalable is a great feature of cloud. This slide gets a little busy, but it kind of talks about how we do things and why our system works so well. So basically, the cloud provides inventory management, risk assessment, chemical labeling. So all that are internal challenges. Then external challenges your organization may find is SDS services, or you need to provide substance data or regulatory information, and all that has to be reported on. So all this is fed from basically our single cloud engine. So we do all of this stuff, software as a service, and then provide this out to the different challenges you have. So when you look at our system, and we hope you will, invite us in and let us show you how we do things, you see that it was definitely architected with the thought process of solving all these problems based out of our cloud platform, leveraging our expertise data and our cloud platform. So another thing we do is we basically manage your SDSs for you. So when we manage your SDSs, we ensure that your SDS data stays current. So we keep your SDSs updated. We send you an email. You know that there's a new one that you can look at. You can do a side-by-side. You accept that as your new SDS. Then that SDS has already been data acquisition by our team. It comes into your system. We keep your old one. And then we in turn leverage that data that we can create labels, reports, mini safety data sheets, where is that chemical located, all that stuff. And all that stuff is managed through our database, and we can also access that information through our API. So we have a web service API. So maybe you have another system, an ERP system, SAP, something like that, that needs data. We have an API that can leverage that and feed data to those other systems. So here again, I've showed this slide once. I'm going to show it again real quickly. The data part is, 20 million SDSs, 2 million vendor gold SDSs that have over 50 data points extract. And then, of course, our Chemwatch Gold SDSs. And our regulatory database, we don't have a slide on that, but our regulatory database is very strong. We have about over 1 million chemicals in that regulatory database that we can, help you to make sure that your chemicals are in compliance, or if you have a chemical that's of concern, what list is it on? We can provide all that to you. And we manage all the SDS updates for you, and it's just part of our service. So we provide emergency reports in 47. We actually support 47 languages, so most all of our information can be reproduced in 47 languages, including our user interface, which is really nice for multinational companies. So employee that's in Germany would see a German user interface on our system. When we create SDSs, we do all 16 sections. We do 93 country formats and in 47 languages. So just some of the flags of the countries we support. Anyway, now it's time for the question and answer. And if you would go ahead and ask questions away. I did want to point out one comment is we do offer trials at Chemwatch, and because you attended the webinar today, if you would like a trial, if you would just go in the question and answer box and just write the word trial, hit enter, then that'll register in the system, and then we can get back with you on the trials. We're happy to provide you a trial. Tom, would you like to look at some of the questions?
Sure. Thank you, Paul. So, folks, just to let you know, what we're going to do is we're going to publish all questions with associated answers on a document and send it out to everyone. If you want your question to be private, please mark it as such in the question box. But I do have one question. Can I attach other documents to a risk assessment? And if so, what types can I attach to it? Sorry, that meant risk assessment report. Sorry.
You can attach other documents to a risk assessment itself. So if you have other types of supporting documents, you can tie that to an individual risk assessment and view those within the risk assessment module. Additionally, you can also have a custom risk assessment report as well that might include other information that's specific to your organization.
Great, thank you. I have one here. I have, does the risk assessment flag those chemicals that would also need to have exposure monitoring? Gus, do you want to take a shot at that one?
Sure. So there isn't a tool out of the box that allows you to necessarily flag those that are specific to exposure monitoring, but we do have tools that are very versatile, and one of those is our red flag tool. So that allows you to flag items within your inventory, so your folders or your manifests, and that is just an indicator that's used within your organization to indicate to users that meet certain criteria. So in this case, it would meet the criteria of the need of exposure monitoring. Additionally, in addition to the manual tags that I pointed out during the demo portion, we have manual tags. So you can also manually tag items that need exposure monitoring, and then you can sort your list based on that tag type. So that's how we handle it in our system.
Excellent.
And tags are a really powerful feature of our system. So what essentially we do is we leverage our regulatory database, and then you just say, I want to know if any of my chemicals are on Prop 65 or in the Homeland Security list. And then we take the power of the computer, turn it back on itself, and then a tag would appear. And you may have noticed on Gusty's screen, there was a little thing that said tags on the right column, and it would basically just appear. And then you would, without having to laboriously look, the system would automatically tell you that this chemical you have is on that list. So it takes just a tiny bit of setup. You go in and say, this is the list I want to monitor. You basically create what the tag looks like and turn the thing loose, and then the system will turn the power of the computer back on itself. So no more somebody looking through lists laboriously trying to figure out, do we have anything that we need to be concerned about that's on this list? We do that for you via tags. So even though we kind of mentioned it in passing, oh yeah, tags, it's a really powerful, cool feature that we have in Chemwatch. So sorry, Tom, go ahead. I had to jump in.
No, Paul. In fact, just to build on that, the tag reflects something that we do with our chemical scientists. What we do is we link the regulation and the affected CAS number. So if regulation X affects CAS numbers A, B, and C, we actually do that linking in real time, sort of behind the scenes. So our regulatory database library of 6,100 plus databases, plus our 20 million plus vendor SDS database, we actually do link those two together. And it allows you to do ingredient-based reporting, it allows you to do risk assessments using vendor data. And the tagging is, quite frankly, a tool that reflects that linking that we do behind the scenes for you. And we do that with chemical scientists. We have about 25 regulatory compliance people whose job is to do primarily that linking. A couple other, before I get to the other questions, quickly on trials. These are 30-day trials. These are free. We also will help you get started. There's some e-learning video on risk assessment, but also we're available to help you get started as well. Question, how do you deal with chemicals that are byproducts and don't have an SDS?
That's a great question. You want to take that one, Gusty? I was going to say we'd have to use our authoring tool, wouldn't you think?
Well, we would be handling that most likely similar to some type of mixture. So what we could do is we could essentially create an SDS using our authoring tool for that byproduct, and then you would have the SDS, all of the H codes would be assigned, and again that would be mirrored into the risk assessment module, and then you can just pick up doing the risk assessment based on the information that has been applied using our authoring tool. Likewise, you can also do that with our labeling tool, so you could just create a label for it and then use that information within the risk assessment as well. But yes, I would treat it most likely as an independent intermediate, and I would maybe author an SDS for that within our Credo tool.
Thank you, Gusty. It actually fits the next question. Can you create an SDS for an in-house mixture?
Absolutely. So again, you would just do that within our authoring tool. You would author an SDS and you would assign all of the appropriate information to that material. Again, our risk assessment is driven off of the H codes that are applied. We actually have a tool that generates this based on the ingredients and also the proportions that you put into the system, but you as the author have the ability to overwrite the H codes that are generated by the system. But regardless, the H codes that are applied within Credo will again translate over to the risk assessment module, and then you can perform the risk assessment on that in-house mixture.
And I love our authoring tool. It's really easy, and we take a piece of our authoring technology and actually put it in our base module for doing secondary labeling. So it's really, really good, and I encourage you to see it. And we probably should have another webinar showing our authoring tool again, Tom, so people can take a look at it. It's fabulous.
And absolutely, and also we offer free trials for our authoring tool in addition to all our chemical management solutions. Two other questions. What's the source for the risk assessment diagram? Is that aligned with ISO 31000? I have to admit, I don't know that answer.
I was going to say we have to.
I'm not sure on the ISO question, but the risk, if this question pertains to the risk matrix, I would believe so, and that risk matrix is modifiable by an admin of the system, so they can actually modify that based on their internal needs, just as a side note.
That's a great answer. And I see someone said provide a link to the recording. Absolutely. The PowerPoint and the recording will all be sent to everybody, to folks probably by the end of today. How does your system help with chemical tracking and reporting?
Where do we start on that one?
Yes, exactly.
Yeah, that's a very deep question that I don't know if we can give a brief
2 minutes.
high level of that.
Right. What I'd like to offer to the person who posed the question is that we can set up a separate demo for that. That might be the easiest way of doing that. But yes, we can do that. It's actually a seamless system, as you saw, risk assessment, authoring, but also chemical tracking, reporting, SDS management. It does it all on the same platform. We use Microsoft.net to provide that capability to you.
And Chemwatch, we were created by one team of developers, so we didn't acquire another company's technology or try to, mash a bunch of stuff together. Everything is seamless, so when you see something in one place in Chemwatch, it's available in another. We never ask our users to copy paste. It's a very integrated, tight system, seamless. So when you see the presentation, you'll be like, wow, that is great, because I never had to copy paste between modules, or if it's here, it's there. You know, it's just a great system. So sorry about that. I got excited.
No problem. I see one last question. The controls do not utilize NIOSH PDT hierarchy of controls in NCZ 590.3. That's quite a question. We may need to get back to you on that one.
Yeah, we'll have to follow up on that one. So, well, I think we're 2 minutes over our time, and I do like to be punctual. The last thing is our next webinar, February 13th, 2018, is just the SDS compliant life cycle. We would like to show you how our system just helps you stay compliant with your SDSs. It's a pretty fundamental thing, but we do it very well, and we would like to show you our ability to execute on that. So with that being said, thank you so much for joining us. And anybody else, Tom, Gusty, you have anything to add before we close?
No, thank you, folks, for your time.
No, thank you, everyone.
Yep, and thank you for letting us have summary afternoon. I hope you have a good day. Thanks.